Okay, welcome back to the Mental Toughness Podcast.org. I'm your host, Steve Siebold. Thanks for joining us today. Remember to subscribe to the podcast on the website at mentaltoughness.podcast.org, and we'll send you an email when the podcast comes out every week, and so you don't miss an episode. Okay, so today I want to talk about and kind of expand on an interview that I did with Dr. Joe Vitale. If you're familiar with Dr. Joe, he's a personal development legend. He's been around for a long time. I've known him probably for 25 years. One of the things he's famous for is being in the movie The Secret. I was not in The Secret. I was in the follow-up movie, the sequel, which was called Beyond the Secret, which wasn't quite as good as The Secret, I didn't think. But anyway, I've known Dr. Joe for a long time. And so he called me up and said, hey, can you be on my show? And he has a show I'd recommend you check out. It's called Zero Limits TV. Zero Limits TV, and he's a really good interviewer. We had a really good show. So what we talked about on that show, I wanted to expand on a little bit for the podcast because I think you can get a lot out of this, especially for those of you who have kids or you teach kids or coach kids or both. And so that covers, I think, a fair amount of people. So Joe was asking me about, on that interview, it was about maybe 45 minutes long on his show last week. And he really likes this book I wrote a few years ago called Secrets Self-Made Millionaires Teach Their Kids. It came out in, I think, June of 2018, so about 4 years ago. And it made the cover of Money Magazine the second month, I think it came out, and it took off like crazy. And so the premise of the book is, for the 38 years, 4 years that I interviewed before when I wrote this book, that I'd interviewed self-made millionaires, one of the questions I've always asked them was, what do rich people teach their kids about money that the middle class and the lower classes in terms of socioeconomics don't teach their kids? What is it that the rich teach their kids about money that can really help them? And so that was always a staple question since 1984. And because I guess I always figured I'd have kids. I didn't have kids, but I figured I would, and I thought that'd be a really good question to know. And the answers, I'll tell you, some of the answers are very surprising to people. When I started doing press for this, I do a lot of television and radio, and I did a fair amount of press for this book when it came out, and some of the media anchors on TV and the radio people were shocked at some of the answers. And I just want to go over a few with you. You can get the book on Amazon if you like it. I think it's one of my favorite books that I've ever written. I really like it. If I had kids, boy, I'd read them this book. I'd fill out. There's a workbook you get that's a free workbook you download, and people have downloaded it all over the world, and they read it with their kids. And people ask, how old should they be? When do you start kids on this process? I would start them 8, 9, 10 years old. Honestly, kids are so much smarter than, maybe not so much smarter, but they're so much more aware because of, the access to the internet than of course we ever were. And even generations that are, generation before my generation. So they're up on things, but what they're not getting typically is the psychology of the wealthy. That's something only wealthy people typically teach their kids because they're the only ones that really know it. That's been my experience anyway. Not rocket science, but the leg up it gives kids is substantial. I mean, I remember in the 80s even thinking, and I was pretty young. I was 19 when I started in 1984 at that year, my sophomore year of college. And I kept thinking, geez, if I would have grown up with this, what would have been possible? How would I see the world differently? And so I want to talk about some of those things because this is really preparation, in my opinion, for one of the things that matters the most in life is that teaching your kids how to become wealthy, and that means different things to different people. But if you're financially independent, you have a very different life. You can do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want. You don't have to answer to anyone, and that's a pretty good thing. I'm not saying you're going to, you have to be driving a Rolls Royce and living in some crazy, place and, driving, sitting on your yacht on the weekends. I'm not saying that. I mean, that's all fine, but most people that are financially independent don't live like that. The average millionaire in America drives a Ford F-150. 10 years old, of course, paid for, but they don't drive Rolls Royces. That's things you mostly see in movies and some people that are very flashy and like to show off their wealth. But for the most part, they're not like that. I've been interviewing these people for 38 years. I've spent my whole adult life with them. So it's more about the idea that if you can teach your kids the psychology of money, the psychology of how to view money in a way and see money and craft their beliefs around money so they're healthy beliefs. So they pursue money, so they don't have to answer to someone else their entire lives. And so give them that opportunity. And that's really what I want to talk about in the podcast today, because it's just a critical thing. So this is really the psychology of preparing your kids to be mentally tough in the context of money or wealth. And I'll take it straight from the book. And the first one is the first chapter in the book. And this really gets under a lot of people's skin. And that's not my point. I will admit that I made this chapter 1 because I did want to hit hard. I wanted to open with a strong chapter, like a real gut punch chapter, because I wanted to wake people up to the fact that if you don't think there's a difference between the way wealthy people teach their kids about money and the way everyone else does, you're kidding yourself. They really do. It really is different. And they really do see money differently. And if you don't think that affects the way they approach it, you're wrong. They do. It really does affect the way you approach it, because it just changes your worldview of what it means and what it doesn't mean, frankly, as well. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. So the first chapter that gets under people's skin, teach your kids, is rich people rule the world. Oh, and people, I remember going on TV in the beginning when I came out with the book, and they said, oh my God, Steve, you're a cynic. What a cynic you are. I mean, doesn't love rule the world? Isn't love supposed to make the world go round? And I always laughed, and they laughed, and I said, wouldn't that be nice? I mean, yeah, I'd prefer that, but it doesn't. It just doesn't. I mean, we're not talking about wishful thinking here. We're talking about mental toughness. We're talking about critical thinking. We're talking about you have to back things up and support things that you say with evidence, not just some opinion. When people say, a lot of the kids today say, well, this is my truth. This is my truth. There is the objective truth, and that's it. There is no my truth. It's the objective truth, or it's not true. So we want to be really careful the way we teach kids how to think, because you want to teach them to think very, very clearly about subjects that matter. And money, like it or not, matters a lot. Rich people rule the world. Money makes the world go round. I wish it were love. You wish it were love. I get it, but it's not. And maybe someday it will be, but it's not. It's money. And so teach them that. That doesn't mean rich people are better. Of course they're not better. That's patently ridiculous. Of course, they're not better in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't make them any smarter. I know people that are so rich you wouldn't believe it, and they're dummies. I can think of a few right now, that you probably know. Here's one for you. The My Pillow guy. That's not a real bright guy. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not being political here necessarily. Not that I'm above it, but this is not a super bright guy, but he is super rich. So he's got something on the ball for sure. But I wouldn't give him any kind of intelligence award at any level. Some of the things this guy says are just insane. But he is rich. So there you go. Okay, so a guy that has, I would say, below average intelligence has more money than he knows what to do with. Okay, there's an example. So it's not that they're any smarter. They're no better. They're typically not any more educated. Okay, they just, usually what it is they focused on making money more than anything else. I mean, that's really the number one thing. They think about it, whereas most people don't. And I didn't either, until I started learning from them. So you teach the kids right off the bat, rich people rule the world. This is not necessarily a good thing, by the way. And I think you should share that with them and say, look, wouldn't it be great if love ruled the world? Wouldn't that be a better world? And, it's hard to argue that it wouldn't be, but it doesn't. So teach them, prepare them for the real world, not the fantasy world that, frankly, most people live in, or many people, maybe would be a better way to say it, live in. This fantasy world that they make up in their head, but it doesn't really exist. You want to prepare them for the rough and tumble of the world. And I don't think a lot of people are prepared. I don't think I was. And I know everyone tried to prepare, everyone tries to prepare. It's not like someone, your coaches, your teachers, your parents, your the clergy, you go to the church, or the Cub Scouts, the Girl Scouts. I think every person that's a mentor when you grow up, they try to prepare you. But I think that in an effort to play down the cold realities of life and the world, they softball it. And that's a mistake. I really believe it's a mistake. I'm not saying you have to scare kids. We don't want to scare anybody, but you have to prepare them that the world is a rough place. Okay. And if you don't have your act together, you're going to get tossed around like a volleyball. And so you got to prepare them for it. And I think rich people, that's why I made the first chapter of the book. Rich people rule the world. How do they do it? They do it through influence. They do it through their money, And there's a lot of evidence to back this up. I'm not going to try to prove each one. You can make your own decision. It's in the book. Again, you can study the book if you want more information, but that's one of them. Another one that I would prepare your kids with is the world is both a brutal and beautiful place. The world is both a brutal and beautiful place. Again, it's not an opinion. You can back it up. I don't think I have to cite too many instances of the world being brutal. Just turn on your television, okay? People get shot every day. Little kids die of cancer. 20% of children in America are food insecure in the richest country in the history of the world. That's shameful, by the way. I can't even believe that statistic, but it's true. It's been true for a long time. And now with Roe v. Wade being overturned, it's going to be a lot more, unfortunately. Unless they do something about that, there's going to be all kinds of kids out there that can't get food. They're born and they have a terrible life, but they got through. So congratulations for that. But now you starve. And so I'm not sure what there's no critical thinking on that one to me, but another time for another show for another time. But the point of it is that you tell them, look, the world is brutal, and here's the examples. Here's the data. Here's the evidence to back it up. Okay, and then you say, but that's the bad news. Okay, so understand when you go out there, you're going to see some brutality. You can't even believe how brutal it is. Okay, try leaving the United States and traveling around the world and see how brutal the world really is. Do you know in some countries, they still stone people to death. They bury them into their neck, and then they stone them. They throw stones at their head and their neck until they bludgeon them to death. That happens now in 2022 in different countries in the world. Not in the U.S., luckily, but not too far away from the U.S. Okay, that's about as brutal a thing as I can even imagine, right? Okay, so there's a lot of evidence to back up the claim, and that's the point. Because it's mental toughness. It's critical thinking. We don't make claims we can't support. That's the whole point, right? It needs to have evidence. The America right now is a country that's shamefully lacking evidence in the claims that people make every day on social media, on television, on radio. I just can't even believe it. People can't. Oh well, this is what it is. This is what news anchors make these claims all the time, and they can't back it up with any evidence. I heard last night on Fox News, I was watching Fox News, and one of the pundits, Laura Ingraham, who I'm not crazy about, but I watch her to see what people are hearing that don't churn the channel because it's important to know. She said, well, the reason for these mass shootings is kids, younger people, when they get out of high school and college, they're smoking pot. It's cannabis that's the reason, people are shooting people in these mass shootings. I mean, I laughed out loud. I said, is she out of her mind? She can't back it up with any evidence whatsoever. Okay, it's just a theory she has because she's a sensationalist. That's how she makes millions of dollars a year. She throws out sensationalism and they pay her to do it. She's not a journalist or anything like that. She's just someone who's made a lot of money just throwing out sensational ideas. Okay, and there's a lot of those people out there, as you know. I don't think I have to give you any more examples. But the point of it is they just throw things out there with no evidence to support it. That is the opposite of critical thinking. That is the purposeful suspension of critical thinking. And we don't want to do that. We want to teach kids to be critical thinkers. Okay, so that's the brutal part. That's pretty easy. Again, now you go into the beautiful part and say, hey, wait a second. Before you jump off a bridge, the world's also a beautiful place. Both aesthetically, people can be extremely nice. I mean, people can be giving, they can be caring, they can be loving, they can also be brutal, but they can be the other side as well. So is life worth living? Yeah, it is. Just know that this dichotomy exists in the world, and it's brutal and it's beautiful. And you prepare them for that. And it makes a big difference. And they start waking up and paying attention, saying, geez, I guess that means, and there's another chapter in the book about this, I should be both a cynic and a pessimist at the same time. Yes, you should. There's another lesson for kids. Don't just be, I'm sorry, I think I said a cynic and a pessimist. What I meant was an optimist and a pessimist. an optimist and a pessimist at the same time. So I think a lot of people are very optimistic. They're very Pollyanna. And they go out there and they say, hey, the world's sunshine and roses. And they just get their head handed to them. You don't want your kid having that experience. You want to let them know, hey, you need to be cynical. You need to be pessimistic at some level with certain things until there's evidence to support that you can be, optimistic and that this is a good thing. Okay? Because it'll protect them. Optimism gives you hope. Pessimism saves you at the end of the day from bad things. So you want to tell them it's both brutal and beautiful. Give them the evidence to back it up. Tell them yes to be a pessimist, yes to be an optimist, both at the same time. Again, that dichotomy of thinking makes a big difference. Here's another one we talk about. It's very important. I'll wrap up with this because obviously this book it's a big book and it has a lot of things. And I recommend it. If you have kids, I would study this book. Don't just buy it and read it and put it on the shelf. Study it, but study it with your kids. Get that workbook. It's for free. And then write down the answers with your kids. They'll never forget it. I have kids, that are parents that have emailed me over the years since the book came out and said, my kid says they're never throwing that workbook away. That's something they did with you on a topic, money, that matters. We're not talking about, some goofy thing. We're not talking about playing Little League baseball here. We're talking about money. It's one of the most important things in life. And so it's going to change their life if they learn how to think about it, because if they learn how to think about it, they'll behave in a different way. And if they behave in a different way, they'll accumulate money. Or they're going to answer to people that have it and the power that people exert over others that have it, which is a shame. But that's the way it works. The last one is magical thinking, avoiding magical thinking. Right? What is magical thinking? Basically Pollyanna thinking. Okay? Thinking without evidence. So I think, well, someday my ship's going to come in. That's an old euphemism, of course, from, not even my generation, my parents' generation. Oh, someday my ship's going to come in. And how exactly is it going to come in? Okay, I get the idea, but where are you working toward it? Is there some kind of plan you have to accomplish it? Well, no, I just have a feeling. Well, guess what? You're a magical thinker, and there's no place for magical thinking in mental toughness. It's foolish. It's a fool's errand. Okay, so teach them, look, avoid magical thinking. Back things up with data, evidence, proof. Okay, and if it can't be backed up, then you call it faith. And then I guess you can make a case. I don't make any case for religion because it doesn't really coincide with critical thinking. It's absolutely, the polar opposite of critical thinking. It's the purposeful suspension of critical thinking, as a matter of fact. You have to suspend your critical thinking to believe in one of the 4,200 gods that exist in the world. There are many, many gods, many, many religions. There's around 4,200. So to believe in any one of the 4,200 gods, you have to, because there's no evidence to support any of them. You've got to completely abandon critical thinking, and that's fine. I'm not putting that down. I don't talk about that in the book because, again, it would go against the premise of the book. Okay, but if you want to teach them about faith, that's a totally different thing. That's a different book, and that's nothing I write about. Okay, so you would have to insert that as you see fit if you think there's value with that, and a lot of people do in America, especially, and that's fine. But this is the polar opposite of that. This is about looking for things that have support. So you're living in reality, not some made up fantasy world, which a lot of people live in, and I think that's why a lot of people end up disappointed with their lives because they're building a life on sand. There's no foundation because there's no evidence to back up what they're thinking. And it's sad. So give your kids a chance. Get them to go through this process. Teach them some of these things. Read the book with them or just go through some of the things I talked about. I think it'll make a huge difference in their lives. I really do. It's sad. I mean, I know I wrote the book. It's self-serving, but believe me, you don't get rich writing books. I've sold a lot of books. You don't get rich writing books, but you do make an impact. If it's a good work, you do make an impact. And I promise you, I've sold enough books to know, almost 2 million, to know that it can make a big difference in a child's life. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. So with that, I'll wrap up the podcast. Thanks for listening. Remember to subscribe, mentaltoughness.podcast.org. Go to the site, subscribe. We'll send you an email. You get the new podcast every week. With that, thanks for listening. See you next time.